First, though, let's bring in Political Editor Andrew Clennell. And Andrew, this week, energy has been back in the mix in terms of the government's message and its policies on renewables. You've come up with some very interesting new polling on nuclear energy right now.
Kieran, Sky News can reveal new polling which shows less than 1 in 5 Australians oppose ending the moratorium on the use of nuclear power in Australia. The polling appears to illustrate why the federal coalition is pushing on with a nuclear policy into the next election. The polling by Resolve, commissioned by consulting firm Society Advisory and obtained exclusively by Sky News, shows a shift in recent years in Australians' views on nuclear power. It shows that when voters were asked whether, quote, Australia should rethink its moratorium ban on nuclear power to give it more flexibility to choose in the future, 49% were in favour, just 18% opposed, with 33% unsure. When those polled were asked if they supported the use of nuclear power in Australia, 33% said yes, 24% were opposed, but 29% were either not having a strong view or are open to the government investigating its use. There were also 13% undecided. The support for the use of nuclear power in Australia was 49% amongst coalition voters, 26% amongst Labor, 17% amongst Greens, and 33% amongst others, but only 28% of Labor voters and 14% of coalition voters were opposed to the use of nuclear power, with the remainder either undecided or thinking it worthy of investigation. Respondents were also asked if it was okay for Australia to store nuclear waste products from its own scientific or submarine reactors, with 47% agreeing, 33% unsure, and 20% disagreeing. And on whether, when Australia has nuclear-powered submarines, as is planned, it was okay for the subs to sit in Australian ports and dry docks. There were 49% who agreed, 34% unsure, just 18% opposed. A question on whether there should be a national vote on introducing nuclear power into Australia got majority support, 53 yes, only 17 opposed. The coalition is understood to be preparing a policy for the next election which involves the introduction of nuclear power. Opposition leader Peter Dutton has flagged this throughout the year.
We've started the debate in relation to the small modular reactors around nuclear that can firm up the renewables in the system. In Ontario, they've got about 60 to 70% of nuclear firming up their renewables. They pay half the kilowatt hour rate that we do here in Australia. So if we want to halve our electricity prices, we should look to the example as we see in Ontario and elsewhere. You would have seen Chris Bowen, one of our favourites. Any Chris Bowen fans in the house? No, good sound Liberals. It's fantastic. You can pick a Labor dud a mile away.
And that was yesterday. The Climate Change and Energy Minister Chris Bowen has rubbished Mr Dutton and his spokesman Ted O'Brien's exploration of nuclear energy as an option for Australia, saying it is the most expensive form of energy and would take years to introduce.
Every time you look at Mr Dutton or Mr O'Brien, they're talking about nuclear. Well, it's time to put some meat on the bone. Where will the nuclear reactors be, these 71? Or will they not actually replace coal? Will they have fewer nuclear reactors and therefore still need the other policies that the country is putting in place? It's a matter for Mr Dutton and Mr O'Brien to finally come clean with the Australian people.
Shapes as a fascinating debate before the 2025 election, but there was a blow last week to the concept of small modular nuclear reactors in the US, with a firm called Develop NuScale, which planned to invest in one, dumping the project after cost blowouts scared away customers. Mr Bowen, who's set to represent Australia at the latest COP meeting on climate change in Dubai, last week announced that the government would underwrite renewable energy projects to get an increased uptake of renewable energy technology in Australia. The policy has the potential to cost the budget billions, but also to earn the budget money if the projects deliver a large enough profit. It also is pretty similar to a New South Wales policy unveiled by their former Energy Minister Matt Keane about 3 or 4 years ago. Ironically, the announcement this week by Mr Bowen led to some energy companies taking a short-term hit to their share price because the implication of the policy could be that some energy giants make less money. And ahead of that COP meeting that Chris Bowen's going to, the Greens leader Adam Bandt was yesterday out on a kayak attempting to blockade the cold port of Newcastle, Kieran.
Indeed, yep. They're always out for a picture opportunity, the Greens, no doubt. Now, I'm going to be joined live by Amanda Rishworth, the Minister for Social Services, in a moment. They're ahead of the debate on the expanded paid parental leave scheme, which is happening this week. But a fair bit else on the agenda in Parliament as well, Andrew.
Well, the plan originally for the Albanese government was to finish the year off with a bang with their IR reforms to go through the Senate. But after the opposition in the Senate and the crossbench kicked them off into the new year, pending an inquiry, those reforms that is, it's meant there's less of an urgency around the end of the parliamentary year. In fact, if the opposition agreed to cancel the last Senate sitting week, which involves one day that the House sits next week, beginning December 4, the government would can the week, but the opposition isn't going to agree to that, is my understanding. The government is still waiting on the passage of two bits of legislation to do with raising critical revenue for the budget around PRRT tax changes and superannuation tax changes for people with more than $3 million in their account. Those bills will be introduced to the House this week, but it's not the intention of the government, as I understand it, to try to force them through the Senate in the few remaining sitting days left, Kieran.